Right. So why are we here? Why have we asked Campbell along to join us for this first webinar of the year? And I think it's mainly because it's pretty tough this time of year, isn't it? I mean, regardless of the fact we've got this bit of a global pandemic going on, the new year does seem to be when we reevaluate where we are in our lives. We reevaluate, are we in the right job? Are we in the right role? Or, like Jill and I often discuss, do we want to just open a little coffee shop on a nice little island somewhere off the coast of Scotland? So this is what we're really looking at, is reevaluating us and then working out that if we do want to make that next step, if we do want to change our job, how do we do that? How do we ensure that it doesn't just become a dream? How do we make it into a reality? I read a really interesting statistic the other day that said the first Wednesday after the new year is when you get the highest volume of job searches, and that's from monster.com. So we're a week late, apologies, but hopefully we'll still be able to make this as useful as possible. Why have we got Campbell here? Well, you see, Campbell has been helping people do just that for over 20 years. Campbell's works is MD of a company called White Cube Consulting, and they help people. They help from the HR perspective, but also from the individual perspective, to try and get that beautiful match of the right people in the right jobs at the right time. But it's not just this that Campbell does. He also has a passion for using Belbin, and we've had a really long chat about this. And I think he won. Not that it was a competition, but Campbell was accredited to use Belbin before I'd even joined. I think that's right, Campbell.
I think so. I think it goes so far back they lost the records, so I'm not 100% sure. But I think I'm about the 20-year mark.
I think you are, and I think you're just before because I'm still only 19 3/4 years, not that I'm counting. And I know that we've had so many discussions, haven't we, over the years, of really how can you use Belbin? And I think that's the critical bit, isn't it? It's not just about knowing team roles, it's about how can we use the information that is contained within your individual Belbin report to be able to, first of all, get the interview. So how can we use it on our CV? And then how can we use it at interview to help us actually get the job? So over to you, Campbell. And I don't know if you're going to do this because, no, actually, before we go over to you, I completely forgot.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Team roles profile. Yeah.
We said this would happen, didn't we? Okay, before we go any further, for those of you who know and have been on our webinars before, what we're going to be doing is just trying to predict how this webinar may go. And to be perfectly honest, it's already gone slightly that way. Campbell, you're the guest. What I'd love you to do is tell me your top 2-3 team roles, please.
So I am a very strong plant.
Okay.
Second, coordinator, and third, resource investigator.
Okay, brilliant. So this, for everybody, if you don't know, is what we call the team circle. It's a great way of really being able to work out and predict how people would work together. So here we have resource investigator, plant, so full of ideas. Lots and lots of ideas, but with that broader perspective as well. So you're always quite sort of laid back with those, looking at the overall strategy. Bottom role?
We shared this earlier. I am zero completer finisher, none. Sadly,
zilch,
yeah.
Nada. Okay, we'll put that one there. So I'm going to put my team roles, and somebody said it's a lot easier to do this if I use different coloured post-it pads. So I'm doing that. So here I am under the resource investigator with Campbell. I'm here also with Campbell on the coordinator. But what I have here is the shaper role as well. My bottom role is also completer finisher. I have less than you, Campbell, and you have 0. And this is because on my Belbin individual report, I actually have a percentile for, it's a small percentile for completer finisher, but it's all down to the negatives. It's all negative words that are being ticked. Okay, so how would we work together? Lots of ideas, lots of tigger, lots of enthusiasm. Perhaps going off a tangent that I wasn't planning on going, but still lots of enthusiasm for that. But we're going to make sure that we keep that overview. And I'm going to be the one that says, come on, we haven't got long to go now. We need to wrap this up. So to make sure that we keep to the objectives. Anything you'd like to add there, Campbell? I think that's a fair reflection.
I think having worked with you sort of over the best part of 20 years, I would concur with all of that. I would agree. I think we make a fabulous team. Not much will maybe get done in terms of practical delivery, but we'll have such a laugh and such fun doing it, I'm sure.
Won't we? For those of you who can't see the flip chart, here we go. So we have the resource investigator, plant, those idea roles there. And here we have the dominant roles of coordinator and shaper. And as you can see, everything else is a blank. So there we have it there. We have the prediction of how this may go. And like I said, we already went off because I forgot to do that. So yes, we've just proved a point, Campbell. Right, so back to where we were. How do you want to start this?
Well, if in doubt, ask a question, I think. So Jo mentioned she would be keen for, it's very difficult when you've got, dozens, if not hundreds of people online to have significant interaction, but I'm going to ask you a question. So let me just share a screen. And I've asked this question a lot. If we were doing a team session with a company who are maybe looking at reviewing their recruitment process, or I've done a lot of outplacement work over the years, helping people with their CV and interview skills and so on. And it's a question I ask a lot, and there's a very specific purpose for it. So the question is quite simply this. Think of someone who you would say is truly excellent at their role. It could be you, it could be a colleague, past or present, a line manager, a subordinate, just anyone that you've worked with who is genuinely excellent at what they do. So what is it that makes them excellent? What is that, the magic ingredient, the difference from the average employee to someone who's excellent? And what I would like you to do is just don't list 20 things each, but pick one or two things at most and pop them in the chat function. So if I were doing this, I might think someone is maybe very knowledgeable on their subject. They might be good at problem solving or whatever. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds, pop a couple of things, ideally each, into the chat function, and I'll get Jo to have a review. I'll have a review and see if there are any themes or patterns that emerge.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Campbell, because that's meant I've had to stay actually with you for this. So we've got some great things coming through. We've got empathy, especially in a leader, integrity, collaboration, proactive, articulate, emotional intelligence, humble, integrity and passion, enthusiastic and focused, a very good listener, fabulously proactive, organized, plans ahead, detail conscious, motivated, committed, authentic, honest and transparent, willing to learn, organized, emotional intelligence again. Great communicator, great with people and good listener, honest, self-assured, dedication and humbleness, willingness to keep learning, communicator, humanity, insight, high expectations of themselves, driven and supportive, expertise and collaboration, good with people, diligent, honest and trustworthy, passionate and knowledgeable, listener, knowledge, supportive, knowledgeable, passionate, a role model, and I like this one, a completer finisher. We've got some great ones coming up here, Campbell. I'm just looking if there's any different ones here. Generous, authentic, team player, confidence, honest, knows the details, listens well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for that. So if we were doing this as a team in a big room, what I would do is put two flip charts up and get you to write what you've put on post-it notes. And on one flip chart, I would have a banner with technical or knowledge-based skills, and the other behavioural attributes. So what I hope you'll have seen is if you were to put these metaphorically onto one of the two flip charts, the vast majority, I think, of what's been said, I would class as behavioural attributes. Some of them you could argue could be both. So something like, occasionally someone will say someone who's got good time management skills. Well, that could be learned, but it's also some people are just good at managing their time. So when we do this exercise in real life, typically what happens is 80% of the post-its are on the behavioural flip chart and about 20 are on the technical side. So the follow-on question, if I'm working with a team on recruitment, is talk me through how you do your recruitment. Well, we advertise for technical skills, we screen for technical skills, we review CVs for technical skills, and at the interview, we interview primarily based on technical skills. And we ask a couple of questions on behaviours. So here's the light bulb moment for me that I had many, many years ago. Hire for behaviour and train for knowledge. That's well, not I had, I'm sure Dr. Meredith Belbin himself probably coined the phrase, but it's such an important point. So what we're going to talk about today is, I'm not taking technical skills and putting them to the side. So, you know, if I want to be a doctor, I need to be qualified. I can't just rock up and, even though I've got a good bedside manner, perhaps, I can't just sort of waltz in and be competent overnight. So the focus for today is really about understanding your own behavioural skills, strengths, attributes, and your weaknesses. And I'm going to give you a few practical tips, techniques, so that you can make the most of these, particularly in your CV and through if you were attending interview. There is a flip side to this. If any of you do recruitment, the same applies. A lot of, if you just reverse the logic, so that instead of looking at how you might prepare for an interview, think about how you might prepare to interview someone as well. So, and I might get Jo to chip in on this, given she is the, I guess, the Belbin expert. There's a Belbin principle, two key concepts, which is effectively the two flip charts that we've got with all the stickers. The post-it notes on it, which is eligibility and suitability. Eligibility is, I suppose, in the example I've given, the technical knowledge, the skills, the know-how, I suppose the technical competence, and that can include qualifications, experience, or if I took a reference for someone and asked if they're a good engineer or accountant, and the employer says yes, they're very competent. What we're going to focus on today is very much the suitability side, looking at behaviours, aptitude, flexibility, adaptability, versatility. So very much the suitability element. And I would say over the last 25 years, we've done a huge amount of recruitment for both internally and externally for clients. And I have a very strong, I suppose, belief, if that's the right word, or preference to encourage organisations to hire for suitability. They need to be cognizant and take into account technical capability, but if you can get someone who's a great fit behaviourally, they will often grow and adapt into the role. So I suppose if we summarise this by looking at a sort of 4-point matrix, where we take eligibility on the left hand or the vertical axis and suitability on the horizontal axis. If someone is low on eligibility and low in suitability, effectively they're not good technically nor behaviourally, we'd class them as a misfit, and they will often leave an organisation quite quickly. They recognise themselves, they're not suitable for the role, and will often leave. What we see a lot in organisations are particularly quite technically orientated organisations are what we would class as a poor fit, which is someone who on paper has all the right knowledge, skills, competencies, but they're low on suitability. So they're the problem child when it comes to I guess, recruitment. So they've got all the knowledge and know-how, but whether they are disruptive or, have poor communication capability, whatever it might be, and they're harder to move on from an organisation because they're technically competent. You would think the ideal fit is what you're looking for, someone who's perfect in every way, someone like Jo, if I can use her as a shining example, both knowledgeable and behaviourally suitable. Jo probably bucks the trend in that when people are an ideal fit, quite often what we see, and I've seen it happen a lot, an organisation will spend a long time recruiting, find someone who they think's perfect, and within 6 months or 12 months, the person's moved on because they've not been challenged. So what we've done a lot internally and helped a lot of our client organisations with is what we would class, or Belbin classes, as the surprise fit, which is someone who's high on suitability. They need to have the core competencies or technical capability, but they're not necessarily the best person on paper, but they've got all the right attributes. So they're they just come in and they fit within the culture of the organisation, and they are often long-term stayers in organisations because they will grow through learning, development, knowledge, and so on. So the best hires we have ever done, and I can say this certainly from our own internal perspective, have categorically been surprise fits. We've turned down some, more technically competent people, but we've found great hires, in my opinion.
Can I just say there, Campbell,
Yes.
is that I couldn't agree more. And I think sometimes, well, it's an interesting one. I was talking to Nigel Belbin just earlier today, and we were talking about this webinar, and he said very often, there's an old adage, and I love Nigel because he always comes up with all of these. And he said, they always used to be said that you are recruited for what you know, and you are sacked or let go for who you are. And that's always been the case, that you're recruited for that technical side, and then people find out it's you and do you fit? And that's normally where the problems are. But the surprise fit is actually where I was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So coming from the pharmaceutical industry, chemistry degree, no knowledge of any of this stuff whatsoever, but was high on the suitability.
Yes.
And so almost 20 years, that's pretty much a long stayer, I'd say.
Absolutely, yes. So what, I guess, what's the point of mentioning this? Well, what I'm going to talk, or Jo and I will talk a bit about further, is thinking about that surprise fit concept, and what you can do, particularly if you were applying for a role. How can you persuade an organisation that you may not be the strongest technically, but you're perfect in every other way? So let's have a look at that.
Brilliant.
If I was working with an individual, I'll ask this as a rhetorical question rather than an interactive one. But even if you have a think individually, you don't need to post this in the chat, but if I were to ask you what a CV is, it's a dictionary definition, typically the answer I get is something like, it's a document that summarises my skills, experience, knowledge, and qualifications, or something like that. There is a point missing for me, and it's a very simple but a huge point, which is a CV for me is exactly that. It's a summary of your skills, your experience, your attributes, personal details, and so on. But the purpose of the document is to act as a sales tool to get you an interview. That's the whole purpose of a CV. The problem is a lot of people write their CV as a summary of their skills and experience, not as a sales tool to get them an interview. So you need to sell yourself. So I'm going to share a couple of ideas. If we were working with someone through an placement process, I'm going to condense about probably 6 to 10 hours of content down to 30 minutes. So I'll be glossing over or skimming over a couple of things without going into too much detail, but hopefully you'll get the concepts of this. A key principle is when writing a CV, very simply, write your CV for the reader, not from your perspective. So think about, what are they looking for? It's a very simple point, but most people don't do that. And that can vary from employer to employer, from job to job. So customization is key.
Oh, actually, Campbell,
Yep.
can we just go back to that
Yes.
point? So what you're saying is don't just have your CV as a static document, even when you're really happy with it and you've checked for all of the typos and you've checked
Yep.
that it says exactly what you want it to say. You can't just say, that's it now. What you need to be doing is revising that for each time you send it out, depending on what it is you think those people are after.
100%. I couldn't agree
Brilliant.
more. And you don't need to necessarily, for me, you don't need to rewrite your whole CV. But if you ask I suppose the key question is, what's the employer looking for, and do I have that in my CV? And particularly this first half page of your CV, which is prime advertising space.
Yeah.
I often talk with people about the 30-second rule. If you don't have critical information in that first half page, and well, I should say the most critical information in that first half page, you might be missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
Quick example. I ran an advert for a reservoir engineer for an oil and gas company recently, which 2 years ago would have been, 30 applicants would have been, a flood. I had 600 applications.
Oh.
So if you imagine the amount of
600.
time I could spend on each application in detail, was limited. So the people who were selected for interview were the ones who really grabbed attention. So you have to think about selling yourself. So if we're going to think about that from a behavioral perspective, I guess how can you do that? Anything else you want to chip in with, Joe?
Just a couple of things that have just come up. Actually, I think Graham's put a good thing is perhaps how about reframing the advert in your own words? So really looking to see what it is and perhaps putting yourself within in that advert.
That's have I ever worked with you, Graham? And that's exactly what I say to people is paraphrase, mirror, don't cut and paste the ad and put it in your CV, but exactly that. The best thing you can do is almost like hold a mirror up to the job spec and reflect exactly what it's looking for as best you can.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
So the key thing about what to put in your CV is not the things that you're best at, but the things that you're best at that are most relevant to the role and what it requires.
Okay, no, that's a great one. Just quickly going back to the suitability, eligibility. So we've got a couple of questions here, which I think I want to put in now because I think that they'll help with that whole concept. Oh, hello.
I'll rejoin you. I'll take the
okay.
Screen share off for a second.
Brilliant. So one question, let me say answering live, click the button. How can you assess suitability given that some of these behavioural characteristics are hard to measure? Well,
great question. That's why we use tools like Belbin, quite simply.
Yeah.
My business partner happens to be my sister. Julie's a psychologist, has worked in I suppose business psychology for a number of years, and one of the things we will often look at is finding the right tool to assess and measure, and you can measure just about anything to varying degrees of success depending on the tool that you use. But I suppose the analogy would be, if you're building a house, you don't get someone to come and build a house with just a hammer. You want someone with a hammer, a saw, a screwdriver, a wrench, whatever is needed. And assessment tools are exactly the same. That there's lots of different assessment tools out in the market. Some assess behaviour, some assess personality, some assess things like creative ability or intelligence or whatever. There's loads of things you can do. So the key starting point is figuring out what you're looking for first. Yeah. So technical and behavioural competencies or whatever the role requires.
Thank you.
And then finding the appropriate tool to measure it.
Obviously, and we would recommend Belbin. Just to let you know, Deborah, is here at Belbin HQ when we do a lot of recruitment, especially on a consultancy level, and we use Belbin obviously, but we also use the 16PF. We also use the Watson Glaser critical thinking analysis, because they're the levels that we're looking for the jobs that we're recruiting. So it is not, we don't just use Belbin, obviously, because there's so many things out there, and you're trying to build up a jigsaw, aren't you? A picture, and this is you just want bits that are going to fill in each and every bit of that. So what we need to make sure we're doing is never ever, and this sort of goes into what Carol was just talking about how can you do this without laying yourselves open to probable, discrimination cases, is that when you are recruiting, so we're from a recruiter's point of view here, unless we've just gone slightly away from the CV, you never recruit on one attribute. No. You recruit on a whole range, a whole myriad of different things. You are looking at qualifications, you are looking at behaviour, you are looking at intelligence, you are looking at personality, you are looking at a range of things, aren't you?
Yes. And, the best form of recruitment and assessment is an assessment centre.
Yes. That
has a range of activities built, designed to assess the specific technical and behavioural and whatever other competencies you require. I would say in 25 years plus of doing recruitment, we have never once had a candidate complain about being rejected, because we can normally provide evidence to support the decision. Yeah. Now, you can't legislate for someone who is, what should I say here, irrational perhaps, or but generally if you give positive, useful feedback as to why someone's been unsuccessful, most people are accepting of it, and often they'll self-identify as why they've been unsuccessful. So anyway.
No, thank you very much. I hope that's answered everybody's questions so far. I just thought we'd get those questions out to start with. So we're going back to the CV again, Campbell. Apologies, we took away there. So we know this is a sales tool. You perhaps need to reposition it. So I can't get the one that I used to get the job at Belbin, which is now 20 years old, because, one, lots of things have happened since then, and two, I'll be applying to a different organisation. So I need to make it relevant to what they want.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to share a Belbin report and let people see what it looks like, because what I'll do is I'll give you a couple of examples of how you can actually take a Belbin report and use that in your CV and interview prep.
No, that's fantastic. So I'm going to share my screen now. Then I'm going to hope that I've actually remembered to open this, which I have, which is okay. Campbell, can you see that the Joe Pink report?
Yes.
I almost slipped up there and said my report, because it is very loosely based on somebody who might be part of this webinar. So this is the Belbin report. The only way of knowing your Belbin Team Role profile is by completing the Belbin Self-Perception Inventory online and receiving one of these reports. If you've added up a score, if you've done a freebie on somebody else's website, it ain't Belbin. This is the only way of legitimately understanding your Belbin profile. And the first page you get here is just a quick how you feel. And if you've got observer assessments, you've asked other people to feedback what they think as well for each of those 9 team roles, the percentiles there. So we're not just one thing, are we? We are, see, that's my little bit of completer finisher. It's all negative. We are a whole mix of these team roles. We then, if you've asked other people to observe you, what have they said? I'm going to go through this quickly, Campbell, because I want to get to your points. The changes, the differences between how they see you. Oh my goodness, I'm just going to keep scrolling. There's just so much information. Here we have team role feedback. This is what's written basically by Meredith Belbin to say the so what does this mean? So this is a great bit of advice. We then look at your strengths and your weaknesses, understanding your contributions, your key points, your work environments, what other people have said. We then go on to the observer assessments. All these words are scrolling through, and then we have this last one here that looks at different sort of work styles based on your top 4 team roles. So this is a Belbin individual report, and this is what we're going to be using. And Campbell's going to show you how to really, I'd say, turbocharge this for your CV. So I'm going to stop sharing now and just let Campbell talk.
Thank you. So because we have limited time today, this is the quick version. As Joe said earlier, what I would encourage anyone to do, if you've got a Belbin report, have a look at it. You can use it in so many different ways. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. I'll quickly share screen again. So if we think of as a typical CV, one of the most common things that people will have front and center of their CV is a summary profile. So if I use the example on screen just now, that's it's quite a short version to get it on a slide, but that's the sort of thing you would see in I suppose someone's summary profile.
Yeah. Team player.
Yes,
You always see team player.
Yeah, everyone's a team player. So looking at one of the pages in the Belbin report, which is, I think it's page, sort of covering it, page 5 on the standard report. So it would be the sort of narrative text that Joe mentioned that Dr. Belbin had written. So without going through this line by line, what I've done is basically highlight, if this were my report, it happens to be Joe Pink's, funnily enough, I've highlighted a few phrases or words that sort of jump out. So if I go back a slide, if we take the original profile and mix it together, you may end up with something a bit more like this. Now, I'm not saying this is the best worded or the best sales pitch ever. It's a Belbin version of a Belbin enhanced version of a summary profile. So you can see where we've added some content, and I guess the focus on this is really on the behavioural attributes, very specifically from the Belbin report, that are a bit more identifying particular skills or nuances of behaviour that are hopefully very relevant to the role that someone is applying for. Not, as Joe says, I'm a good team player. You know, everyone says that. I don't know anyone who's, well, that's not true. I know one or two people are not, but in the main, everyone's a good team player. So that's just one example of how you can go through pretty much any of the content in your Belbin report and use it for, say, your summary profile.
Do you know what I really like about that, Campbell? Is it doesn't feel like a copy and paste. It really feels that you're using, this great language, which would be quite different to other people's as well, because that's what you want to do, isn't it? Is stand up head and shoulders above everybody else who's writing team player. And I think this really does help. Well, I've got a lovely visual in my mind about the type of person this is.
Yes, and the key thing is, these are all nice positive words, but if they're not relevant to the role that you're applying for, if I'm applying for a job and it needs someone who's exceptionally high in attention to detail, unless I say that, I'm going to be overlooked. So contextual relevance is everything. So make it mirror, as Graham pointed out, mirror what the role is looking for to the best of your ability. There's a quick point here. I'd normally spend more time on this, but a quick point, the difference in language. What a lot of people do is cut and paste from their CV, from their job spec into their CV. And I think for me, it's the difference between telling and selling. Job descriptions are generally factual documents that will give an overview of the tasks or responsibilities that a job requires. And they're often written in a way that's a bit bland or a bit, So the top example is typically what you'll see in a job spec: responsible for managing the ABC project team and budget. Changing a few words and adding a bit of polish, we can transform that into something much more impactful. So lead a multidisciplinary team of 30 technicians. So we've got active language lead, we've got delivered, ahead of schedule, all active language. And by putting in ahead of schedule and below budget, effectively we're starting to talk about almost achievement-based statements. So I suppose summarising that, to think about your CV and taking your Belbin report, some of the key behavioural elements, and I mean specific competencies that you have, not generic phrases like team player or good communication skills. What's that even mean? And being more implicit and using language that is more, hopefully more impactful.
Do you know, I really wish that we had this kind of knowledge many years ago, because doesn't it just seem so obvious that this is what we should be doing? I think it looks really obvious. If you look at the difference there between that first couple of lines and then that paragraph below, of course we should be selling ourselves like that. But the problem is we're not taught that way.
Yes.
My eldest, she's just been filling in applications for sixth form college. I mean, goodness knows what's happening at the moment, but she's applying anyway. And her teachers are telling her to list down her predicted grades and to list down her work experience.
Yeah.
Nobody told her to list or put things into context. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Yes, I work in the local shop, but what does that mean?
Yes.
It's adding that wonderful colour to it, isn't it? To make you sound like a human being as opposed to anything else. Luckily, she filled in the Belbin Get Set, which is the Belbin, but for younger people. And we went through that and it really helped it, come alive. But it's hard, isn't it? Because we're not taught this. We're not taught how to really emphasize our strengths in that way.
And that's, I guess, what I mean by writing your CV with the reader in mind,
Yeah.
not here's a list of tasks that I do. It's exactly that. So
fantastic.
Any other points on that, Joe, or any questions? Or
just that this is harder than it looks. Don't think this is an easy thing to do. You need to give yourself the time to be able to go through this. And using your Belbin report is really helping you with that because it's giving you an extra layer, another pot of language to use, isn't it?
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm going to skip over this. So if the principle here is write your CV with the employer in mind, the same applies for the interview. So what's at basic level, what generally is an interviewer looking for? Well, they want to assess, can you do the job? Have you got the technical skills, the achievements, experience, and so on? There's then, will you do the job, which is your motivation, your interest in the role, your so on. And the third bit, which is really what today is all about, is about fit to the team and the organization. And that can be communication style, attitude, personality, values, management style, even down to things like appearance. So thinking about, if we move on, I suppose away from the CV and thinking about, well, let's assume you've crafted a brilliant CV now and you've been invited for an interview. How are you going to sell yourself at interview? And I suppose it's the same principle as the CV. If you can think of the questions you're going to be asked, it's a bit like sitting an open book exam. I think an interview is pretty much an open book exam. You should be able to predict with a reasonable degree of accuracy the likely questions you'll be asked by an interviewer. You won't guess them all, but they're broadly going to be around the competencies required in the role, your personality, your motivation, and some administrative questions around salary and benefits. If you are, the key to succeeding is down to preparation. And again, using a Belbin report, if you look at this sort of personality and motivational piece in particular, a Belbin report can be hugely beneficial in helping you to convey, I suppose, what you can offer a prospective employer. So again, if I was working with someone, I would, and if we'd, half a dozen people online, I would get a volunteer to do this. But to give you a worked example, I've interviewed thousands of people over the years, and when I ask the question, what are your strengths? There's a very common pattern that emerges. People will answer in a very certain way. One of the first things they will say, if not first, second, is I'm a good team player. Yeah. So what? Everyone on the planet is, right? What's your unique strengths? So I'll give you a quick worked example on behavioural strengths. So a typical first answer, compared to what we're wanting to get, is our best answer. So a typical first answer would be, I believe my behavioural strengths are I'm very organised, I've got a good attention to detail.
This is not
or
you,
not,
then.
yeah, not me. I'm very good at problem solving, and I think I'm very diplomatic. That's the sort of interview answer I get all the time. 90% of people would give that sort of level or quality of answer. So simple process. Stage 1, add more. And the Belbin aficionados in the audience may recognise I've covered all the bases here. Let's say someone is organised, good attention to detail, good at problem solving, diplomatic, wildly enthusiastic, collaborative, strategic thinker, very decisive and single-minded. So we've now got more stuff. So we've doubled, slightly more than doubled our quantity. But to answer that question, it still should take 30 to 60 seconds. So it's not a long answer.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with this, it's a bit all over the place. It's like a big shopping list that's unstructured. So the next step is to categorize this into some sort of structure. So using Belbin principles, as you may not see the wheel behind you, but there's 3 action-orientated roles, 3 thinking roles, and 3 social roles. So if I was going to structure an answer about my behavioural skills, I might group these so that there's more logic to the structure. But there's a missing ingredient, which is evidence. So I can say I'm organised, but so can Joe, so can any of you. So the best answers provide evidence to support that. So something like, if I go back to the first answer, if you compare that with something like this, and forgive me if this is not word perfect, I believe I've got strengths in 3 core areas. One of my primary behavioural attributes is I'm very action orientated. I believe I'm highly organised. I've organised recently an awards event for 400 employees that was hugely successful. I'm very decisive, and I've also got a very high attention to detail. I'm responsible for producing monthly accounts that need to be 100% accurate. I believe I have very strong analytical skills. I'm very strategic minded. I act as the lead for the production of the annual business plan. I'm very single-minded and knowledgeable in my subject, and I believe I'm very strong at solving problems. One example being the development of a highly innovative solution for Project X. And finally, I feel that I have very strong social skills. I'm naturally diplomatic. I've had extensive positive client feedback in relation to my customer care skills. I've got a very enthusiastic approach. And finally, I feel I'm highly skilled at collaboration, working with both clients and suppliers, a recent example being Project X. Can you see, hopefully, how that goes from the first answer, which is the first 4 things that come into my head, to a well-structured, well-organised answer that demonstrates, particularly in this case, behavioural skills and attributes with some supporting evidence. And I appreciate the examples are not the best. They could be even better, but hopefully you get the principle.
Well, Campbell, I think we're in agreement here, in agreement with a few people on the chat, as you've definitely got the job, so well done. I think this just brings everything alive, doesn't it? And I'm thinking that if I'm at an interview and I'm asking somebody, and I've had seen 10 people that day, I've sifted through all the CVs as well, being able to put it in that way is just fantastic. It really brings everything, like I said, brings everybody alive, brings you as a person, doesn't it,
yes.
to the interview or to the CV. What I think is quite interesting, though, is that sometimes we feel we do have to tick all the boxes. So what you've done very cleverly there is that you've got all of the action roles, so the completer, finisher, the implementer, the shaper, the analytical, the thinking roles, which is the plant monitor, evaluator, specialist, and the social skills, which is the team worker, the coordinator, and the resource investigator. And they've beautifully gone into your example. But of course, what is so important is we don't try and be what we're not.
Yes.
So to really know, actually, you may have real strength in each of those areas, but to make sure that you don't pretend to have a behavioural strength somewhere which you don't, because you'll end up in a job you hate.
Yes, and back to what I said, if the role that you're applying for is primarily action orientated, well, increase that section, add more to it, and diminish the, if it's sitting in a room crunching numbers, focus on the analytical skills. If it's out selling and networking, focus on the social skills.
Absolutely.
So contextual relevance is key.
Isn't it just?
Sorry, Joe, carry on.
No. After you.
I was going to say, I've got one last thing to quickly share, and I know you wanted to do a Q&A, which is, well, two last things. The page that for me effectively is your executive summary of behavioural strengths is in the standard report. It's page 8, which is the Joe showed it earlier. The combinations of your top 4 team roles combined, which effectively gives you sound bites to say these are your real behavioural strengths. So in this case, controlling, exploiting and exploring opportunities, assigning tasks and facilitating. So for me, the starting point for writing things like your personal profile or prepping for an interview would be that page. It's effectively the essence of your behavioural strengths.
Yeah. This page is so powerful. For those of you who joined us for a webinar, our last webinar of last year with Lindsay Lala, when we're talking about authentic leadership, we talked about this combination of team roles very much as your superpowers. Because we're not just one thing, we are a myriad of all 9. And I love the fact that we talked about this, saying, looking at the combinations, where are your superpowers? How are you able to really promote this to other people? Because these really are what your strengths are, aren't they? In any way, you could just copy and paste this really and just put it in your CV.
Virtually. I would encourage you to do that, but think again about things like active language. Think about how you can make this as strong as it can be. But it's a brilliant starting point. Isn't
it just? And that's what we need very often. So where do we start? How can we, really project our strengths to the best of our abilities? I love this. I mean, this is, yes, I do believe this is my profile. Implementer's not so high nowadays, I have to say. I think this is quite an old one. But I think using those sort of words as a starting point are really going to help there. Yeah. Wonderful.
Okay, last thing, and I'll try and do this in 3 minutes if I can. One of the questions, if I'm working with someone, one of the questions they fear the most in an interview is what's your weaknesses, because almost by definition, you're talking about things you're not good at. So I'm going to give you a quick technique to give your best answer to a weakness question and actually sell yourself. So step 1 is what I call reduce or soften weakness. Not, I am hopeless at detail. Sometimes I can occasionally be a little bit lacking in attention to detail. Sounds better. Quickly, so recognize the weakness, soften it, switch from the negative to the positive, and then talk about, if it's a technical skills or knowledge gap, talk about how you can learn. If it's a behavioral weakness, talk about the opposite. So in my case, I have no attention to detail because I'm a big picture ideas person. So what you want to do is factor that in, almost answer like a politician. So don't answer the question you've been asked, but answer the question you want them to hear about, which is your strength, and end on a high. So if I were to visualize it, it would look something like this, where you've got a positive, from a negative to a positive answer. Your worst weakness answer would be all negative over a period of time. Your best answer should be recognizing the weakness, softening it, making it as near neutral as possible, and then tipping it into positive notes. So again, if I take a direct lift from Joe Pink's report, I just took the first line as an example. Possible weakness, you may risk alienating others as a result of your drive to get things done. So we've got someone who's gung-ho, 100 miles an hour, get things done, but they might leave people behind or upset people along the way. So you don't say, I can alienate others as a result of my drive to get things done. And this is slightly contrived. I made it sound softer than it maybe is, but something like, I recognize, not I am, I recognize I can sometimes alienate certain people. So it's not, I do it to everyone all the time. That makes it sound less of an issue. And from that point on, everything is positive. Involved in focusing on delivering the task. I can occasionally overlook the impact, but I'm aware of it. I'm working hard. I've improved in this area. I'm reducing. I'm continually improving, and I'm getting feedback on my soft skills as well as my technical ability. If you look at that, 80% of the content there is selling yourself, drive, impact, continual learning, awareness, self-awareness, and you're answering a weakness question. I am done with the slides. I'll come back to this. I'll stop screen sharing for now and hand over to you, Joe, if you've any questions or anyone has any burning questions.
Campbell, I'd just like to say thank you for that, because what you've done is really been able to say, well, first of all, contextualizing why is behaviour important? Why is it important that we even start this process? If we're looking for that next step, what is it that we need to do? And it's focusing quite rightly, not necessarily on the qualifications, although that tick, they're important, but really looking at that behaviour. But then how do you do that? And it's Belbin, the Belbin Individual Report, that really helps start you on that journey of using that behavioural language to sell yourself as a person.
Yes.
You can bring strengths in, and these strengths are team player. They're ones which are really, really useful, and you know that the employer, the potential employer, will be interested in. So you've taken that and then also looked at not only how you can project yourself, but looking at those top 4 team roles as well, looking at the combinations, another way of doing that. Yeah. But also the age old, isn't it? The age old, to tell me about your weaknesses. I think that must be on, what question will I be asked to interview? They will ask you about your weaknesses. And this way of like flipping it, I think really, really helps answer the question, but in a way in which you want it to be answered.
Yeah. And I could talk for another hour, as you know.
I know
about all of this. I'm a huge Belbin fan. If you haven't already done Belbin, it's not a sales pitch. I would encourage you to go and have a look at it at least. For the few pounds that it costs, it is invaluable. It can be invaluable. I've used my own report hundreds of times over the years in lots of different ways. Whether it's meeting a client for the first time and realizing, sussing them out, their behavioural style and adapting to suit, assessing candidates, loads of practical applications.
Thank you, Campbell. It is a very, very versatile tool. Now, we've got a few questions here.
Yeah.
One of them, and I think this is a debate that could go on forever, is that the report on your snapshot that you showed, obviously, was just looking at your self-perception only, how you see yourself. Yeah. You know what's coming. What do you think about asking for those observer assessments? Because otherwise, how useful is it if it's just based on what we think?
In an ideal world, 100%. Again, if you can get, don't just take your own self-perception. Think about, we often have blind spots, particularly around weaknesses. And I'm sure you'll be the same, Joe. When we run a Belbin team session with a team of people, when you talk about the strengths, there's lots of nodding heads, and you talk about weaknesses, and everyone's going, that's not me. I don't do that. And then you go and ask their partner or their colleague or their spouse or whatever, and they go, absolutely, they do that every single day. So self-awareness is key. And the greater your level of self-awareness, the better that you can fine-tune things like your CV or interview skills, so that you're not trying to be all things to all people, but you're trying to be the best version of yourself, recognizing what you're good at. In my case, ideas, working with people, terrible at detail. So don't, what I do is, as I try and minimize the roles that I need to be, like doing accounts. I have to do accounts, but I get an accountant to check them, thankfully. So I think absolutely observer feedback is hugely beneficial as well.
Brilliant. And I couldn't agree more. And I think if you can ask your colleagues, what you've also got is a lovely page on the report when you've asked for feedback from others, and it says other people have seen your strengths where. And again, you can incorporate that into, well, actually, you say, I have asked other people for feedback and they've agreed that they see X, Y, and Z. You can cleverly adapt that.
The obvious parallel is an appraisal.
Yeah.
You wouldn't self-appraise and without getting your line manager to say, well, I agree or disagree, or yes, you're on point there. So yeah, the more rounded feedback, the better.
Brilliant, absolutely. Thank you. Another question here. Should you complete, hang on, done. I'm a bit out of practice here. Look, answer live. Should you keep we
we talked about this just before you came online. I'm guilty of not having updated mine in a number of years, but I think good practice in any sort of psychometric or behavioural assessment would typically be somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. We would normally recommend people can change. They tend not to change like Jekyll and Hyde, but they will adapt over time. I think you said earlier, Joe, you're not as high an implementer now as you once were.
No,
I'm
work with Jill. I don't need
my resource investigator used to be quite low compared to my team worker, and it's flipped. So I would say, you don't need to do it every 3 months, but something like 18 months to 2 years would be probably sufficient.
Absolutely. And remember, this is a behavioural tool, so you would expect your behaviour to change. As we go through life, different things, different experiences, the fact that we're working from home, all of these things change the way that we behave. So it's a really good idea to go. And also, if you're using it as a development tool, you need to be able to check to see whether or not the work that you have been doing on yourself for your own growth and learning, is it having an effect? Are your observers seeing the things that you've been working on? And the only way of doing that is to keep going back to it. So it should be, Belbin isn't something that you have done to you. Belbin is something that helps you to start your journey into becoming more effective when working with others and working with an organisation. It's just the starting point. You need to develop it. You need to continue working with that. Okay. My goodness. Oh, I like that. Somebody's put it's essential to have observers. You want to the whole process. You wouldn't just drive a car in first gear only. That's a lovely way of putting it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. We're up to our hour, Campbell.
Yep.
One question before we go is somebody wants to know what the picture is behind you. Whereabouts in Scotland is that?
I have no idea. It's I don't know if you can see it. I'll try and give you a full technical.
Beautiful.
It's an artist called Peter Goodfellow. It used to hang in our old office, and I appropriated it, shall we say, and I just love it. It's very I happen to have one of his prints in the house, but this is an original, and I'm not quite sure. I think I don't know if it's a specific place, but it's definitely Scotland somewhere. So
it is. So what have we done? Hopefully over the last hour, we've helped people understand how to use their behavioural strengths in hopefully getting themselves a new job, a new position, or perhaps the same one, but just understanding it a little bit more using the Belbin reports, understanding that it's not all about qualifications, it's also about your behaviours, trying to find those surprise fits that actually are going to thrive within your organisation, that you can train and who will stay there forever and they will never ever leave. There is so much there to do. So Campbell, thank you so much for sharing such vast experiences that you have. What I will do is some of the comments on the chat, don't worry, we will be sending the slides, we will be sending the recording, we will be sending Campbell's contact details. I think you've got a fan club building up here, Campbell. And told Campbell to keep out of the chat because he'd get too distracted.
I've just put my contact details in the chat, should anyone
thank you very
require.
much.
So there you go.
So all of this will be available. So again, thank you very much, everybody, for taking part into this first webinar of 2021. We hope that the year gets better. Don't think it can get that much worse, can it? And please look out for the emails to introduce the next webinars that we have ready for you. So it's goodbye from me and Campbell.
And it's goodbye from her.
Perfect. Thank you so much, very much, everybody. Have a great rest of the days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, we're two Ronnie's fans, Gloria. Oh, we're all getting to that age, aren't we? Yes.